Hello everyone, I'm Alex, and today I invite you into the riveting story of Victoria Langford, a woman who turned betrayal into power, loss into legacy, and pain into triumph. This is not just a tale of deception and downfall, it is a testament to resilience, justice, and the unwavering strength of the human spirit. When Victoria's world crumbled, her husband's lies, her sister's ultimate betrayal, the theft of her father's legacy, she faced a choice: be destroyed or rebuild. But she didn't just rebuild, she rose, unshaken, reclaiming everything that was stolen, not through vengeance, but through brilliance, courage, and sheer determination. This is a story for anyone who has ever been wronged, for those who have faced ruin and wondered if they could rise again. Because true power is not in revenge, it's in rewriting your own future. Stay with me as we uncover the extraordinary journey of Victoria Langford. Morning mist clung to the stately brownstones of Greenwich Village, a crisp autumn breeze carrying the scent of rain and espresso through the cobblestone streets. In a lavish penthouse overlooking the Hudson River, Victoria Langford, a 38-year-old luxury real estate mogul, was already immersed in her morning routine: black coffee in a porcelain demitasse cup, the soft hum of classical music drifting through her sunlit kitchen adorned with white marble and fresh orchids. Everything in Victoria's world was polished, precise, controlled, just the way she had built it. Behind her, Daniel Langford, her husband of 12 years, entered with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to admiration. His bespoke Brioni suit draped effortlessly over his lean frame, a Patek Philippe watch gleaming on his wrist, a silent reminder of the power he wielded on Wall Street. He leaned down, pressing a light kiss to her shoulder. "Big day?" he asked, his voice smooth, practiced. Victoria offered a small, knowing smile. "The Astoria Park deal closes this afternoon, a $45 million contract." Daniel's smile widened. "That's my Victoria. Always winning." For years, Victoria had convinced herself that this was happiness, a marriage of equals, a partnership built on ambition and success. But beneath the curated perfection of their lives, something had begun to shift. Her younger sister, Isabel Monroe, 32, had recently reappeared in her life, her presence an unsettling mix of warmth and unease. Isabel had always been the free spirit, once a promising medical researcher, now inexplicably jobless but draped in couture. Victoria noticed the details: the Chanel bags, the Cartier bracelets, the pristine Jimmy Choos, all far beyond Isabel's means. Still, it wasn't Isabel's sudden indulgence in luxury that unsettled Victoria the most, it was how frequently she visited on the days Daniel worked from home. "I've been learning about investments," Isabel had mentioned one evening, her blue eyes glinting with a newfound excitement. "Daniel's been teaching me." A flicker of unease coiled in Victoria's stomach, but she dismissed it. Daniel was a seasoned financial strategist. Maybe he was simply helping her sister become independent. Victoria, a woman of logic and discipline, did not believe in paranoia. So, she told herself it was nothing. Just stress. Just work. Just life. She had no way of knowing that her perfect world was already beginning to fracture, and soon, it would shatter completely. The evening air was thick with the scent of jasmine and freshly fallen rain as Victoria Langford stepped out of her Rolls-Royce Cullinan, the distant hum of New York City traffic underscoring the quiet luxury of her Greenwich Village townhouse. Tonight should have been a celebration. Victoria had just closed the Astoria Park deal, a $45 million contract that further cemented her place as one of the most powerful real estate moguls in the city. The evening's champagne toasts, the handshakes of Manhattan's elite, the envious glances from competitors, all of it should have left her basking in triumph. And yet, something felt wrong. As she ascended the front steps, a subtle tension coiled in her chest, an unease she couldn't name. The townhouse, usually illuminated with the golden glow of warm sconces, was eerily dark. Daniel's car was missing. Frowning, she checked her phone. No messages from Daniel. No texts from Isabel. She had called both earlier, but neither had answered. The knot in her stomach tightened. Victoria stepped inside, kicking off her heels, the cool marble floors grounding her. The house was immaculate, too immaculate. No half-empty whiskey glass on the kitchen counter where Daniel usually left it. No soft jazz playing from the Sonos speakers. Then she caught something else. A scent. Isabel's perfume. A delicate trace of orchidee vanille from Van Cleef & Arpels, faint, but unmistakable. Victoria stilled. Something inside her whispered, "Don't go upstairs." But she did. She climbed the walnut staircase, her fingers grazing the polished iron railing. The hallway stretched before her, too quiet, too still, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Her heart pounded as she reached for the bedroom door. She pushed it open. And her world shattered. The soft glow of the bedside lamp cast a cruel spotlight on the scene before her. Daniel. Isabel. Together. In her bed. For a moment, time fractured, reality slipping through her grasp like water. Daniel, always composed, always in control, froze mid-motion, his sharp blue eyes widening in something dangerously close to annoyance. As if she was the one intruding. Isabel gasped, scrambling for the silk sheets, her once effortless poise collapsing into something small and pathetic. But Victoria barely saw her. Her ears roared with the sound of blood, her vision narrowing on the man who had promised her forever. "Victoria," Daniel started, voice smooth, practiced, but for the first time, there was a crack in the performance. A bitter laugh, sharp, guttural, disbelieving, escaped her lips before she could stop it. "Don't," she cut him off, her voice trembling, not with weakness, but with something darker. Rage. Heartbreak. Clarity. She turned her gaze to Isabel, her younger sister, the girl she had protected, nurtured, defended against the world. "After everything I've done for you," Victoria whispered, the words tasting like poison on her tongue. Isabel couldn't meet her eyes. No apology. No explanation. Just silence. And somehow, that was the worst betrayal of all. Victoria took a slow breath, willing herself to remain calm. She would not scream. She would not cry. She would not let them see her break. Instead, she took one calculated step backward, crossing her arms. "I want both of you out." Daniel scoffed, adjusting his Rolex with an infuriating ease. "You don't get to make demands, Victoria." She smiled. A slow, knowing, devastating smile. "Actually, I do." And that's when he realized. The townhouse, the Hamptons estate, the offshore accounts, the art collection, even his precious Aston Martin, all of it was in her name. Daniel had always thought of himself as the architect of their life. But Victoria had been the foundation. And now, she was pulling it out from under him. For the first time, fear flickered in his gaze. Victoria turned before she could see it consume him. She walked out of the bedroom. Out of the life she had once believed was hers. Victoria sat in her private attorney's office the next morning, fingers wrapped around a steaming cup of espresso. Across from her, her divorce attorney, one of the best in the country, reviewed the case with a clinical precision that felt almost soothing. "You hold every financial asset," he confirmed, flipping through the files. Daniel had no idea of the ironclad nature of their prenup. Victoria had built her empire from nothing, she wasn't naive enough to let anyone take it from her. "And Isabel?" Victoria asked, her voice betraying nothing. The attorney barely glanced up. "She has nothing. No claim. No inheritance." Victoria exhaled slowly. For years, she had taken care of Isabel, shielding her, guiding her, ensuring she never felt the struggles Victoria had once endured. And in return, Isabel had traded her loyalty for silk sheets and whispered lies. Victoria had spent her entire life believing family was unbreakable. Tonight, that belief had died. And in its place, something colder, sharper, stronger was being born. She set down her cup, straightened her posture, and looked her attorney in the eye. File the papers. The glass doors of Barclay and Foster Private Banking loomed before Victoria Langford, their sleek gold lettering reflecting the soft glow of the Manhattan skyline. The weight of exhaustion clung to her bones, but she squared her shoulders, stepping into the climate-controlled hush of wealth and discretion. She had spent the past week untangling the wreckage of her life, filing for divorce, liquidating assets, and ensuring Daniel's downfall was as swift as his betrayal. But there was still one last thing she needed to check. Her father's trust. A legacy meant for his care, one that should have remained untouched. She approached the polished marble counter, her Louboutin heels clicking in a measured, deliberate rhythm. The banker, a man in a tailored charcoal suit, his expression unreadable, scanned her file before looking up. "I'm sorry, Ms. Langford," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "But the funds have already been withdrawn." Victoria's grip on the counter tightened. "That's impossible." Her heartbeat was a slow, heavy drum. The banker cleared his throat, pulling up records. "The account was liquidated 6 months ago, transferred in full. The beneficiary was Isabel Monroe." Silence crashed over her, deafening. For a moment, everything blurred, the distant murmur of banking executives, the scent of fresh espresso, the smooth feel of marble under her fingertips. Her father's money. His life savings. Gone. Victoria exhaled slowly, steadying herself. And where did it go? The banker hesitated before sliding a portfolio of transactions across the counter. Several offshore accounts. Large withdrawals from Dubai, Monaco, and Switzerland. Victoria forced herself to read. Private jets. Penthouse suites. Personal shopping experiences in Milan. Luxury yachts. A world of decadence built on stolen wealth. Her sister hadn't just betrayed her. She had stolen from their father, the man who had given them everything. Her hands trembled, but she pressed them flat against the counter, forcing control. She would not break here. Instead, she lifted her chin, her voice cold and razor-sharp. Print everything. The townhouse felt cavernous when Victoria stepped inside later that evening, the emptiness stretching out like an open wound. The furniture was still here, the artwork untouched. But everything felt hollow. She poured herself a glass of whiskey, her hands finally betraying a slight tremor as she sifted through the pages. Every transaction was a knife to the gut. She remembered the hospital bills, the difficult decisions, the private nurses, the medications her father needed. And all the while, Isabel had been parading through the French Riviera, draped in stolen silk and diamonds. Victoria closed her eyes. She had been so blind. Not just to Isabel. To everything. Daniel. Isabel. They had played her for a fool. No, she had allowed herself to believe in the illusion. A brittle laugh escaped her lips. No more. She reached for her phone, dialing a number she hadn't used in years. A sharp voice answered on the first ring. "It's been a long time, Victoria." Victoria took a slow sip of her whiskey before speaking. "I need you to find someone for me." 3 days later, Victoria stepped into a private investigator's office in Tribeca, the air thick with the scent of strong coffee and aged leather. A man in his early 50s, Nathan Carter, sat behind an oak desk, flipping through the file on Isabel Monroe. His sharp, analytical gaze skimmed over the details, barely concealing his distaste. "She's been reckless," he said finally. If she thought offshore accounts would protect her, she was wrong. Victoria crossed her legs, her patience razor-thin. "Where is she now?" Nathan leaned back, fingers tapping against the file. "She's in Monaco. But she's running out of money." Victoria's lips curled in a slow, dangerous smile. "Then let's make sure she drowns." Monaco was a city of opulence, its streets lined with supercars, billionaires, and whispered deals behind closed doors. But Victoria wasn't here for the glamour. She was here to end this. Dressed in a black silk blouse and tailored trousers, she walked into the Monte Carlo casino, her heels sinking into the plush carpet. At the VIP roulette table, Isabel sat draped in gold, laughter bubbling from her lips as she sipped a glass of Dom Perignon. She hadn't noticed Victoria yet. But when she did, the blood drained from her face. Victoria took her time, walking over, finally stopping just behind her sister's chair. Isabel's smile faltered, then collapsed. "Victoria." Victoria leaned down, her voice soft but laced with ice. "Are you enjoying my father's money?" Isabel's fingers tightened around the champagne flute. I didn't think you'd come." Victoria laughed, low, almost amused. "No. You thought I'd let you get away with it." A cold hush settled over the table. The other guests, sensing something dangerous and unsaid, discreetly excused themselves. Victoria set a thick folder of documents onto the velvet tabletop. Bank statements. Wire transfers. Your entire financial trail laid out in perfect detail. Isabel's breath came faster now, panic flickering in her eyes. Victoria leaned in closer, lowering her voice so only Isabel could hear. "You're out of money. The banks are freezing your accounts as we speak. And guess what?" She tilted her head. "The authorities will be here in an hour." Isabel's hand trembled around her glass. "Please, Victoria," she whispered. "Don't do this." Victoria studied her, feeling nothing at all. Then, slowly, she straightened. "You made your choice, Isabel. Now you live with it." She turned, walking away without looking back. Behind her, Isabel sat frozen, her world, just like Victoria's once had, crumbling into dust. And for the first time, Victoria felt free. The autumn sun cast golden streaks across Victoria Langford's penthouse as she stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, staring out over the Hudson River. The city moved beneath her, taxi horns blaring, people rushing through their lives, but for the first time in weeks, she felt still. Isabel was gone. The Monaco confrontation had sealed her fate, and the headlines had done the rest. Fraud. Embezzlement. Wire fraud charges under investigation. Bank accounts frozen. No way out. Victoria should have felt satisfaction. But all she felt was emptiness. The betrayal had been burned into her like a brand, but vengeance hadn't erased it. The money was still gone. Their father's dignity, his security, stolen and wasted on luxury yachts and designer shoes. Isabel had begged in that last moment, "Please, Victoria, don't do this." But Victoria hadn't done anything. Isabel had done it to herself. And now, it was time to do what came next. Victoria tightened the belt of her silk robe, crossing the living room where her lead attorney, Philip Crane, waited. Philip had been her father's lawyer for over 20 years, and unlike the ruthless corporate sharks she worked with, he had always been a steady, ethical presence in her life. "She's backed into a corner," Philip said, scanning the financial statements in front of him. "And with the offshore accounts shut down, it won't be long before she's completely broke." Victoria exhaled, pouring herself a glass of scotch. "Her desperation makes her dangerous," she murmured. "And Daniel?" Philip smirked, leaning back in his chair. "Your ex-husband is trying to cut a deal to avoid jail time. He's willing to testify against Isabel in exchange for leniency." A slow smile curved Victoria's lips. How poetic. The man who had destroyed their marriage. The sister who had stolen their father's future. Now turning on each other to save themselves. Victoria set her glass down. "Make the deal." Philip raised an eyebrow. "You're sure?" Victoria met his gaze, unwavering. "This was never about revenge," she said, voice smooth as glass. "It's about justice. And it's time they face it." Philip nodded, slipping the papers back into his briefcase. And just like that, the final move was set. 3 weeks later, Victoria stepped into the U.S. District Courthouse, her heels clicking against the polished floors. Reporters swarmed outside, their cameras flashing, their voices a chaotic blur of questions. Ms. Langford, is it true that Isabel Monroe funneled millions through illegal offshore accounts? What do you have to say about Daniel Langford's cooperation with federal prosecutors? Victoria ignored them all, her expression unreadable, her posture regal and unshaken. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Daniel sat at the defense table, looking smaller than she had ever seen him. The once polished Wall Street kingpin was now a man on the verge of ruin, his tailored suit unable to hide the weight of his own collapse. And beside him, Isabel. She looked worse than Victoria had expected, her blonde hair pulled into a haphazard bun, dark circles beneath her eyes, her designer clothes replaced with a simple black dress that failed to restore the illusion of power. She glanced up, eyes meeting Victoria's for just a second. Victoria held the stare. Then, without a flicker of emotion, she looked away. The trial was brutal. The prosecution laid out every detail, the fraudulent accounts, the fake investments, the stolen trust fund. Daniel took the stand, his testimony damning. She convinced me to move the money, he admitted, voice laced with carefully rehearsed remorse. She told me it was a family investment. I had no idea the extent of what she was doing. A carefully placed lie, but one the prosecution accepted in exchange for his cooperation. Isabel's attorney fought hard, painting her as a woman manipulated by greed, pressured by a powerful man, someone who had made mistakes but wasn't a criminal. But Victoria had anticipated this. The moment of true reckoning came when the prosecution presented a final piece of evidence, a recording of Isabel herself, speaking in a moment of arrogance, bragging to a Monaco investor about playing the system and always staying one step ahead. The courtroom fell silent as the words played. And in that silence, Isabel knew it was over. The jury returned in less than 4 hours. Guilty. 5 years in federal prison. The sentence was lighter than Victoria had hoped, but it didn't matter. The world knew the truth now. And Isabel would never escape the weight of her choices. As the judge hammered the gavel, sealing Isabel's fate, Victoria felt something unexpected. Not triumph. Not victory. Just, release. It was over. She stood, smoothing the lapels of her blazer, turning without a second glance. And as she walked out of the courtroom, stepping into the crisp autumn air, she took a deep breath. For the first time in a long, long time. She was free. The city stretched before her, glittering under the soft golden hues of an early evening sky. Victoria Langford stood on the terrace of her newly acquired property in the Upper East Side, a glass of wine in hand, watching as the world carried on, oblivious to the storm she had just weathered. The trial was over. Isabel was gone. 5 years in prison. Daniel, reduced to nothing, had fled into obscurity, a shadow of the man who once thought he was untouchable. She had won. And yet, victory felt different than she expected. There was no overwhelming sense of triumph. No rush of satisfaction. Just quiet. For the first time in years, there was no battle left to fight. The weeks that followed felt strangely hollow. Victoria had spent so long surviving, outmaneuvering, retaliating, that she hadn't prepared herself for what came after. She had built her career on the idea of always moving forward, there was no time to look back, no space for sentimentality. But now, there was nothing holding her back. The townhouse was sold. The divorce finalized. She had more money than she would ever need, more power than she had ever dreamed of. And yet, some nights, she still found herself reaching for her phone, expecting to see Isabel's name flash across the screen. It never did. Her sister was gone. Not just from New York. Not just from society. But from her life. Victoria took another sip of wine, inhaling the crisp autumn air. She had one last thing to do. The Langford Foundation for Ethical Senior Living was more than just a real estate project. It was a promise. A vow to restore what had been stolen, not just money, but dignity, security, legacy. Victoria had spent months negotiating contracts, acquiring properties, and turning her father's original vision into something far greater than he could have ever imagined. And now, she stood at the groundbreaking ceremony, watching as the first shovel hit the dirt. Beside her, Philip Crane, her father's longtime lawyer and trusted confidant, adjusted his cufflinks. "He would have been proud of you," he said, his voice softer than usual. Victoria exhaled, the weight of his words settling deep in her chest. "I hope so." Because this was the only way she knew how to make peace with the past, not by erasing it, but by building something stronger from its ashes. She had spent years defining herself by what she had lost. Now, it was time to define herself by what she could create. It arrived on an unassuming Wednesday morning. A simple white envelope. No return address. Victoria hesitated before opening it, her hand steady but her heart unsteady. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Isabel. She hadn't expected this. She wasn't sure if she even wanted it. But she read it anyway. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even know if I forgive myself. For a long time, I told myself that I was just choosing the life I deserved, that I had spent years in your shadow, waiting for my own chance to be something more. I was wrong. I lost everything. Not just the money. Not just my freedom. I lost you. I don't know if that will ever change. But I wanted you to know, I am trying. In prison, I've met people who have lost far more than I have. And for the first time, I understand what it means to have nothing. I don't deserve your kindness. But maybe one day, I'll deserve your understanding. I hope, wherever you are, you found peace. Isabel." Victoria stared at the letter, reading it twice. 3 times. Then, slowly, she folded it, setting it on the marble countertop. Her first instinct was to throw it away. To pretend it had never come, just as Isabel had pretended their father's suffering had never mattered. But instead, she let it sit there. Not forgiven. Not forgotten. Just, there. Because healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about deciding how much of it you were willing to carry forward. She wasn't sure yet what that answer was. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid to find out. Victoria turned away from the letter, walking toward the window, watching as the first foundation of her new empire was laid. This was her future. And this time, she was building it on her own terms. The first snowfall of winter blanketed New York City in a soft, quiet hush. From her penthouse overlooking Central Park, Victoria Langford watched as the city stretched beneath her, its endless lights shimmering in the dusk. For the first time in a long time, she felt at peace. The battle was over. Isabel was gone, Daniel had disappeared into obscurity, and the empire she had once fought to preserve had been rebuilt, on her terms. But the past still lingered in small ways. The letter from Isabel sat untouched on her desk. Not discarded, not acknowledged, just, there. Some wounds didn't heal overnight. Some never fully healed at all. But healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about learning how to carry the weight without letting it consume you. Victoria had spent years fighting to reclaim what had been taken from her. But now, it was time to create something new. The Langford Foundation for Ethical Senior Living was already breaking ground on its second location. The name Langford was no longer tied to scandal or betrayal, it was tied to progress, justice, and legacy. Her father's dream, once stolen, had been returned to where it belonged. And for Victoria, that was enough. One evening, as she sat in her office, sipping a glass of wine, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. She hesitated. Then, slowly, she picked it up. Victoria. The voice on the other end was uncertain, hesitant, familiar. For a moment, she considered hanging up. But instead, she exhaled. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She simply listened. Because the future wasn't about erasing the past, it was about deciding what to do with it. And for the first time, the choice was entirely hers. Victoria Langford's story is a testament to the quiet, unshakable power of resilience. Life has a way of testing us in the most brutal of ways: betrayal from those we trust, injustice that seems insurmountable, and losses that threaten to break us. But true strength is not found in seeking vengeance, it is found in the ability to rebuild. Victoria did not let the deceit of her husband or the ultimate betrayal of her sister define her. She did not waste herself on bitterness or self-pity. Instead, she took control of the ruins they left behind and built something greater than any of them had ever imagined. But beyond justice, beyond triumph, her story carries a deeper truth: healing is not about erasing the past, but about reclaiming the future. Forgiveness is not an obligation, nor is it always deserved, but letting go is a choice. In the end, Victoria does not beg for closure, nor does she offer absolution. She simply moves forward, unburdened. And in doing so, she delivers the most powerful lesson of all: we are not defined by what was taken from us, but by what we create in its place.